this. I've never done like,
Hi, it's great to see you.
yeah, this double thing where, yeah, I can tell that you're at home in San Francisco. I'm here in Merced. So yeah, let's talk about how this event came to be. So I met Peter the Saturday after the Meta layoff in November. I was laid off on a Wednesday, and then, I was kind of like, what do I want to do? I was scrolling through Facebook, I think it was 9 o'clock. I slept in, or maybe no, it was 7. I wake up early, and yeah, I was just like, what's going on, chilling. And I saw that there was a conference for Latinos in tech, and I said, and I saw that I knew one of the people that was speaking, and I followed him, and I said, oh, I should really go, see what's going on. Maybe I'll work in tech again. So I went, and I got to see Peter speak, and it was pretty wild what happened, but he was just talking about his life, being interviewed. And he mentioned, I think the first thing was he mentioned being from Merced, and it is a pretty small town in California. It's where the cows are, but it's growing. I went to UC Merced. I just bought this yesterday. Yeah, we have swag. So I just thought it was really crazy to meet. I never met someone in tech that was from Merced. Like I said, it's a small town. It's growing, but I hadn't met anybody else. And I always mention it. This is one of the things I want to talk about, is always bring up these things about you that make you unique. And we're UXers, or maybe interested in UX, and it's really about finding those connections, and learning these things about people. So we also want to be doing that, right? We want to be putting out that information, so people can find these commonalities. And so, yeah, first he said Merced, then he kept talking about his life, and he said that he was an English major. And I'm like, whoa, there's not a lot of us in tech. Like I also have a history degree, and I get really excited when I see that, someone has it on their LinkedIn, because I'll read your whole thing. I love reading. So I'll read your whole thing. And if I see like history major, English major, or anything related to that, like anthropology, psychology, I'll be like, I took those classes. I love those classes. Let's talk about anything. If I see, what their thesis was about, let's talk about it. If we have anything that I can talk about, because we're humans, and we want to make connections with people. We're social. We don't want to feel like freaks and weirdos, even though, some of us might identify as nerds or weirdos or geeks or whatever, what have you. We want to find those commonalities. So English major, just crazy in tech. That's not a thing. Everyone's, computer scientists. Or if you go on the non-technical side, it's typically like psychology majors or something like that. So to have an English major was fun. And then the person interviewing saw that I was wearing a Meta shirt. That was another thing I did. Even though I didn't work for Meta, it was a talking point. And I'm very introverted. So if I don't have to initiate a conversation, yay. So I put it on a shirt so people would talk to me and say, oh, do you work at Meta? Or, what, how do you feel about what just happened, right? Everybody knew it. It was in San Francisco, the event. So, and we were all tech workers. And yeah, it was a conversation starter. And then it got me one more talking point with Peter. He finished speaking, and I think he had to leave really quickly after the event. So I think I was the only person that got to talk to him.
Yeah, I had to go back and take over with my kids so my wife could go out to her event. So it was one of those like back-to-back Saturday afternoons.
Yeah, so I just like rushed like to where he was. He was getting his like jacket, putting his coat on. I was like, I need to talk to you right now. And I was like, I was the person that whooped like 2 times, and I'm wearing a Meta shirt. I just got laid off, but like I can't believe like that this just happened, because that's crazy that these are 2 very rare, as a library or library professional, metadata is what we call it, as information about the objects or people in the library. So just those commonalities, I was like, whoa. And he was like, where did you live? And we talked about what schools we went to. He actually went to my middle school. I don't want to age you, Peter.
Yeah, it was many, many, many years before I think before you were even born, I was at that middle school.
Yes.
So
Or just about you were in middle school. Yeah. And so I reached out to him on LinkedIn, which is, what you have to do in this world, in this tech world now. And I'm trying to teach people outside of tech that this is the future and this is how you're going to need to network and get jobs. I reached out to him on LinkedIn and I said, hey, I mentioned your name in the family chat, and this is a very small town Merced thing. My mom goes, oh yeah, his dad was a doctor, and he mentioned in his presentation that his dad was a doctor and how important education was to him. And my mom said that his dad helped deliver 2 of my older siblings. So he could have delivered me, but there were some medical issues, so he didn't. And then my brother said that his wife's brother is Peter's childhood friend. Like they used to go over to each other's houses and like, I don't know what you played with and stuff like that.
a lot of Robotech. That was our we're into. So if people know that.
And just, yeah, Peter said that he did that event for Latinos in tech because he wants to get more involved in this kind of stuff. He's made it and he wants to help us out. So then I said, hey, I volunteer for this organization. That's another one for Latinos in tech. Would you want to, I mean, it's very specific to UX, but I think you work with UX designers and everything. So I still don't really understand what you do now, but he can talk about, how he started out, with writing as an English major and then, went on to bigger and greater things and is doing what he's doing now at Meta, helping make awesome things.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, it was almost spooky to meet someone who had from my hometown, and I'm not sure I'd ever met anybody from my hometown in tech, in all my career. It's a small place, also a place that can be sort of inward looking sometimes, I think, in terms of its perspective, right? Because you kind of feel very cut off from the other parts of California or overlooked, right? And that was something that
I'm connecting
yeah.
it to the Bay Area right now.
It's very it's funny because I saw something where somebody said it's talking about the Bay Area and they included Merced in the Bay Area, and I was like, no, this is not, Merced is not the Bay Area. We're our own thing there.
We're a 2.5, 3-hour drive away.
Yeah. And so it's someplace that I obviously grew up, and my mom and my brother still there. My brother actually had to evacuate due to the flooding there earlier this month, so for if anybody has heard of Merced recently in the news, it's because of the flooding, and it was hit especially hard. And so something that I've been obviously thinking a lot about and offering assistance to family members there. But in terms of what I do and my role now and how it relates to UX, so I am head of product at Meta's new product experimentation group, which you probably haven't heard of, but which is okay. But we are essentially like a startup-like studio within the company where we generate entirely new standalone products for the company. So we're not building for Instagram or for WhatsApp or for anything like that. We're trying to create entirely new products in various categories at which we think are interesting and exciting. I'd say generative AI being one of the areas that we're spending a lot of time thinking about right now. And so in my role as head of product, I oversee all of our early stage explorations and product incubations. So essentially run that whole product process. And as you imagine, crafting really great user experiences is very key to what we do. And so we think a lot about empowering, the small teams here led by founders to really be very cross-disciplinary and to own every aspect of the product. So, as you can imagine, in a big company, functions can be very siloed, where you'll have almost like a assembly line kind of, it's like, here's the product, design, and here's the engineering, and here's the marketing, and here's the, whatever the compliance regulatory stuff. When you are a founder,
hold on, do you have any TPMs in there? I used to recruit for TPMs.
We don't have any TPMs.
It's too small, huh?
Yeah, we're too small. Yeah. But my org is only about 80 people right now. And so what you do as a founder is you'll have a small team, and you have to really own every aspect of that. So, marketing isn't something you hand off to somebody else. Marketing is something you develop, you own. You get support, but you own it, right? As a designer, you're in charge of really the whole end, conceptualizing, figuring out every aspect of the product. You're maybe the only designer that works on the product, so you have to think about every piece of it. And so, it is a lot like what being at a startup can feel like. And in my career, I could talk a little bit about how I got here. But I was someone who so technically my undergraduate was a degree in something called social studies, where it was sort of like a cross-disciplinary program that brought in critical theory and literary analysis and economics and sociology and political theory. And so very much sort of like thinking about like big theory, thinking about the world and society and culture, which I just loved.
Humanities and social sciences.
Yeah,
Put it
so
all
everything
together.
kind of mixed up all together, right?
Yeah.
And I ended up going on to get a master's in English in a program that focused on post-structuralism, which is like a French literary critical like theory that I love. And so you wouldn't think that necessarily was directly applicable to the world of tech or to all this stuff, but I think and I think if you do UX, I think you understand very almost innately how subtle the difference between good product and a bad product can be, about how much craft you have to put into this, how much empathy you have to have for the user and putting yourself in their shoes and sort of understanding where they're coming from, what their needs are, what their conscious and unconscious desires are in terms of building something. And so, from my standpoint, I'd spent, the early part of my, my education, the early part of my career, where I was as a journalist, trying to understand where are things going, what are the big trends, what's driving things forward, what are the, what things are unexpected that are happening, sort of this like looking around the corner. And almost by accident, I ended up becoming a startup founder where I was a journalist working in a magazine called Red Herring in the late 90s, which was sort of like the magazine covering the whole .com boom.
You're dating yourself now.
I know. I've been around a long time. Let's put it this way: this cycle we're going through right now, this downturn, is like my fourth downturn. Like I've seen a lot of this stuff. And so I worked at this magazine, loved it, was, covering emerging technologies, emerging markets. So I'd go to like South Africa, I'd go to Nepal, and I'd write about, how the internet was changing culture and creating new opportunities and challenging is, challenging established, social norms and things like that. And lost that job in May of 2001 and wasn't sure what I was going to do. So it's similar. Yeah, exactly. The place that the place that I was, and had lost a job that I loved and had really found an identity that I loved, which was being a technology journalist. And spent the next year or so not being able to find a job anywhere because of the recession, and and there not being a lot of demand for tech journalists. And so moved to New York. Was supposed to move on September 11th that year. Wasn't able to, but did move. And about 3 weeks later. And then several months after I moved to New York, I ended up starting Gizmodo, which, if people know, is still around. I'm still very successful, very proud of the work that they're doing today. And that was an experiment that I did as like a side project because literally no one would hire me. I couldn't find a job anywhere. But it tapped into something. I was able to tap into something I think was really important, which was this trend, this change that I was seeing in technology, where it was going from being this thing that sort of was in the background to something that was, becoming part of our pop culture, right? Like the internet was becoming something that, wasn't just how we were sharing things, but it was a place where we were spending time and where we were increasingly, thinking about. And, with Gizmodo, which was focused on like gadgets and consumer technology, I had seen, especially with like the iPod, that, gadgets weren't just sort of these things that you bought. They were almost like a new form of pop culture in the way that people wanted to read about them, wanted to follow them, wanted to know about them in the same way that people wanted to know about, movies or about sports or about celebrities or whatever. And so I kind of tapped into something that was beneath the current, so to speak. And I think that my background, again, as someone coming from a critical theory background, a cultural studies background, an English background, I think I was able to pick up on that in a way that maybe someone who would come from more of an engineering background. And again, there are definitely times when I wish that I had taken a computer science class at college and learned how to code more than like the tiny little bit that I can barely do right now. But I think that like my perspective coming from a different place is where I was able to see an opportunity that like others maybe weren't able to. And that's something that stuck with me throughout my entire career, is that having people come from a different perspective, a different place, it doesn't necessarily mean that one perspective is more valid than another, but that having that difference can unlock or at least reveal things that you may not be thinking about. And so in my role now, I am always thinking about, I'm always trying to figure out like, what are the things I'm not thinking about? What are the perspectives I'm not seeing? What are the trends that I'm missing? And so I try to expose myself to a lot of different, I read I read voraciously, trying to stay on top of so many different things from so many different sources. And I try to meet and talk with really smart people that are just, doing this work and exploring, because, I think having that feel for where things are at, is really, really critical.
I was just going to post in the chat, because this is what I do. I have always messages on the side because I can do both. I was going to say, surround yourself with positive influencers, not these like social media influencers, like actual really like people like Peter. I met Peter. I'm like, I want to keep talking to Peter. I'm talking to Peter all the time on LinkedIn. Like, hey, I'm doing this thing now. And like, hey, like, I'm not asking him like, how's your day and stuff like that. I'm just like, I'm doing cool shit. You want to hear about it?
I love hearing about it.
And people are like, yeah, people will be like, I love your energy. I love, what you're bringing to the table, and you're expanding my mind, and you'll just keep meeting people that do that.
Yeah. And I think that's something that like I've been very, I've been very fortunate in my career, in that like I've been able to indulge this side of things, right? That, not that that Gizmodo worked is I sometimes called a happy accident, because it happened to be that like my perspective was one that other people wanted to tap into or share or read about, right? And that the way that I wanted to talk about consumer tech. And again, I had been a journalist before, and so and I'd written for Red Herring, but I also was writing for like the New York Times and for Fortune and for a bunch of places. And what drove me crazy was that there was this sort of way that you had to write about it that was almost, not that you exactly had to dumb it down, but that you had to sort of assume that like, well, the reader doesn't know that much and maybe they're not even that interested. So kind of just sort of flatten it out a little bit, right? And I said, you know what, I want to take advantage of blogging, which was a very new thing at the time, very, very new to be blogging. And I said, well, I can do this all myself. I don't need an editor. Maybe I should have had an editor sometimes, but I didn't need an editor, right, to post. And I said, I'm just going to talk about this stuff the way that when I'm hanging out with my friends, we're just sitting around, we're talking about stuff, we're gossiping, we're like, hey, did you hear about this thing that's coming out? And kind of having this casual tone that was still informed and authoritative, and also doing something that I couldn't do as a journalist, which was to say, here's what I know, but here's what I don't know. And it's kind of refreshing to be able to say like, yeah, like I heard this, I don't know if it's true, you take it or leave it, right? And so I created this sort of flow around Gizmodo, and then within Gadget, which I started a couple of years later, where it was just a conversation that was happening, all day, and I was very quick to learn from my audience and to realize that that they were almost always much smarter than me and more knowledgeable than me and more authoritative than me about all this stuff. And so, if I was going to talk about, Bluetooth or something like that, I had to come correct. Like I had to understand what I was talking about, because, there was always going to be, there were like Bluetooth engineers, like people who like wrote the Bluetooth spec reading the site, and so I had to and you'd get corrected by that. And it was actually kind of awesome in a way, because you're like, wow, like I got to write up. I have to move up to these people's level which is the opposite of a lot of, journalism, right? Which is sort of like, oh no, like kind of bring it down, like make it more broadly appealing. And I realized,
Yeah,
no,
the general population and things like that.
yeah, like I had to like, I was like, no, like I want to go for this group of super passionate people. And I think that, there was this era in the sort of like 2000s where we sort of realized, oh yeah, like the internet can be a collection of like niches and where people are connecting around their passions, and it doesn't have to all be, and it's funny because I ended up selling the company to AOL, but it doesn't have to all be AOL, right? Where it's and AOL bought us because they were trying to get away from being like this big monolithic thing, right? To sort of actually serving these niches, right? And it was something that like I was very I was able to tap into, because again, like this focus on, starting from the user, so to speak, and sort of trying to think of myself as like, well, I'm one of these people who like, this is what I want. And I think other people might want this too. But also in the course of like doing Gizmodo and then Engadget, it was constantly like, I have to work up to the level of the user here. I have to like, I have to or the reader, the user, however you want to define it. And that's something that like I've brought through me, throughout my entire career. And with the work that I'm doing here at Meta, it's really about, helping founders dig into what their product, who it's for, what it actually does, and why would somebody keep using it? That's a question I have to ask people all the time. Okay, not just why do I install it the first time, but why do I use it the 100th time? Like what makes me keep coming back? What value are you giving me? Or why, what is motivating me to do that? What is the thing that like makes me excited to, open this product, use this app or play this game or whatever every day or every week or whatever frequency we're looking for.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. But I'm lucky to get to work with, just some of like the best talent like in the world. Like it's just absolutely phenomenal, and why I ended up, joining this team about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah, I met someone at Meta. I think it was like the orientation. I can't remember what he was. He was like VP of oh God, what is it called? Brain. Anyways, he's like really high up, right? There's a bunch of VPs, but he's like on the org chart, like in the first 2 or something under Zuck. I looked him up. And he was talking about that. I think he mentioned like, oh, that he's an INFP. He's like, if anybody cares about Myers-Briggs stuff. And I spoke up. I was like, right away, I was like, I'm an INFP. Oh my God, like I love this stuff. And I mentioned like, can you speak to how important soft skills are in tech? Because I'm going to start in recruiting, and I'm going to have to learn all kinds of technical jargon and things like that. But it seems like a job, that I was hired to do because I have this customer service background. I'm a genealogist, so I can find people. Typically they're dead, but I can find
you can find live people too.
I can find live people too. I have found family members. And that's also, I brought that up in my interview, that I made Facebook groups and I've made Facebook pages, and like I've used Facebook to find family, find loved ones, find like my mom's childhood friend I found on there. It doesn't take a lot. Anyways, if anybody's looking for somebody, you want to stalk someone, living or dead, I find dead people. So yeah, I was like, can you speak to soft skills? And he's like, oh my God. He's like, we're building products for people. Like, yes, we want to build cool things and stuff like that, but it's also the whole purpose we're building this stuff is to help people, and that's how we're gonna sell the stuff. Like that's how we're making money. That's why businesses are formed, are for people. I guess there's stuff for like pets and stuff, but it's still people buying the stuff for the pets. The pets can't buy the stuff. Sorry, going on a tangent. But yeah, I think that's why I'm so into like UX design and like product management and this aspect of tech. I can talk to the engineers so much, but again, I was hiring for TPMs, and those are some of the, if you don't understand engineering and you want to learn more, they talk to everybody, right? They are organizing huge like amounts of teams. They're talking to legal, they're talking to everybody like in the company to make things happen. And so it's, I don't know if like that's very related to what you do, because yours is so small, but it's like the CEO, right? Like the CEO has to have their hands in everything, and they're delegating, and it's like a, I don't know, it's like for when things get too complicated. And you
Yeah.
were talking about, writing for an audience that is technical when you're not. I was talking to people that had been engineers, or were engineers, but that didn't matter. Like, I could ask them questions about, their work, and sometimes they taught me things, and that was a major clue that they were a good TPM, because they can explain things that are very complicated and dumb it down for us non-technical people. But those,
Yeah.
I just feel like those soft skills are huge when we're dealing with people, we're collaborating, and again, building things for people. So humanities and social science majors, I'm trying to encourage to join tech. And I mean, we have a lot to say about the ethics and the morals as well, because we really care about people.
Yeah. I think, I think one of the things that, again, having a humanities background, and again, I don't want to, I think, like, as I'll say, there are times when I wish I had done more in engineering and in computer science and things like that. Even just out of like personal interest, right? Very much loved physics in high school, but didn't quite have the aptitude to go much further with it. I think, I think that one of the things that you get to learn how to do, often with the humanities degree, is to create mental models, right? To think about how things work together, about whether, if you think about, if you are, to be able to write well, you have to be able, to create a cogent argument, and to be able to take someone along through it and get them to your conclusion, right? They may not agree with it, but like, if you can't explain it clearly and kind of pull them along through that journey, you're not doing your job very well, right? And I think that's true for a lot of like social science, obviously for social sciences, and you think about like linguistics and all sorts of things. Like, you're creating mental models, right, about how how things work together. And when it comes to designing a product, being able to hold that mental model, to be able to not just create it, but to challenge it, to poke at it, to take in new information and to be able to adjust it. That's not something that is purely an engineering challenge, right? It's not a technical challenge necessarily, though obviously the technical implementation of it is very important, and whether it's feasible and can be built is mission critical. But I think that, like, what I focus on is my job is really just to support and enable our founders to be able to build their products and to help them think through what they're building. Obviously, on some level, I have like approval. I have the final approval into like what gets built and whether things continue to receive investment. It's part of my responsibility in terms of allocating our resources wisely. But ultimately, like, nothing. I cannot be successful if our founders don't make successful products, right? And to help them do that is part of me, mentoring them or coaching them on how to think about their products, how to think through what they're building, how to think about these core, behaviors, these core motivations, and to really, sort of try to abstract out the mental model of what the product is, how it works, and who it's for. And I think one of the things that's sort of great, but also challenging about NPE, this group at Meta, is that it is small. So you don't necessarily have tons of resources to do every executional challenge, but you do have the autonomy to realize the product that you want to realize, to build the product you want to build without minimal layers of bureaucracy and process.
I just want to interrupt you, because as a linguist, I've been going back into my linguist background from like 7 years ago. I've been making a list of my favorite words, and autonomy is, you just said that, and I'm like, gonna add it to my list. Autonomy. I want autonomy. I want to be a freelancer and a consultant. I don't want to be in the big companies yet. I can do that later. I need to venture on my own, young child. I need to like Luke and Frodo it. I need to go on my own adventure, and then what you did.
And that's I did not expect that I would be at a big company at this stage in my career. Before this, I had my own venture fund, which I ran for 6 years and did pretty well with that. But what I found was that I loved working with founders on their products. I didn't really like the finance part of being a venture capitalist.
Surprise, surprise.
I'm not like a finance person, and
Uh-oh.
certainly a lot
We
of people.
don't number.
Yeah, and so having to like raise the fund and do all the financial management of a fund and things like that. And not that, I mean, I did it. It's just I didn't enjoy it very much, and so it was an opportunity to sort of really just focus in on the part that I loved, which was the creative part of coming up with the ideas and the ideation and testing them and bringing them to market, and but also working with just like super talented people to help them bring their products to life. And so it was tough to sort of leave your own thing to go to a big company. But it
I
felt
mean,
like,
I literally just did the same thing, and I was telling everyone I was between Stanford Library, university supervisor, like I did before Holy Names University, or Meta as an apprentice, and I was like, do I continue on this path and like stay in libraries and be a supervisor and like move up the ranks, or do I go for this crazy shit that I got into? Like, what a wild thing! And I went on an adventure.
I think
But
it's, and I think in the long run, you'll look back, that was the right thing to do, right? You'll look
yeah,
back on that.
I met people like you, and like, there are very, very interesting people working in tech. And, I've met amazing people in the Cafecito because there's a place for all of us. And we're getting, I don't know if you have anything else to say. We're getting close to like the Q&A
Yeah,
time. I want
I
to
think
give
we'll make sure
people,
we have time for questions.
yeah.
So I guess we can open them up.
All right. And then while we, you start answering those, I'm going to start putting links in the chat so that people will know what's going on. We have donations open for Tequeria, if anybody, because it's always been free coming to the Cafecito. This event is free. So if you want to make donations, we're going to do that. We're going to, Kieran's making an appearance. My nephew, the joys of being back home. He stole my penguin. Bye. That's so cute. He's in the recording now forever. Oh man, I didn't even get into the genealogy. I'm going to bring up my own question because I want you to talk about your dad. But also we're going to put the donation page for from the city of Merced, since we both want to help out our town. There's some places that are 6 feet underwater. Governor Newsom came to visit. Biden has declared a major emergency. Personally, you said your family has been affected. My childhood home is leaking right now, and our tenants were evacuated and they were able to come back. I'm not going to cry. They were able to come back. Sorry, guys, this happens. Another reason why I don't want to work at a big company. I cry a lot, and it's not always taken well when you're working in a company, or even at a university or something, or a library. Even it depends. It depends on who you're working with on your team. I
will tell you, crying
yeah.
is okay at NPE. It's we have
Oh,
it. So it's
well, yeah.
I have cried in my role at NPE.
If your work doesn't
So,
work out, right? You've been working on it for like months or years, and it's you're emotionally invested in it. You've invested time in it. Yay, I can cry with theater. Noted. This is going to be on all our Zoom calls now. I'm just going to break down. But yeah, like it's been hard the last few weeks. And, I reached out to Brenda. I was like, I have to move because I got laid off. I couldn't afford rent in San Francisco anymore. I had some time to, and the holidays happened, and my parents went on a cruise in the Caribbean, and I was like, this is too much change. Where's my Christmas? But yeah, coming back stronger than ever because of people like Peter who have been there to mentor me. And he reached out when the floods happened. He's like, I know you're moving back. How's it going over there? But yeah,
yeah,
please
no,
donate if you can.
I'd say, the thing about the flooding is having grown up there, there's this kind of river creek that goes to the middle
Bear
of the
Creek,
town.
yeah.
And honestly, like the last couple
I'm gonna
decades,
cry.
it had been almost dry because of the
Yeah.
drought. And so to see it overflowing was almost, you're just almost like, I almost was incomprehensible because I hadn't seen it flood since I was like a kid, I think.
Yeah.
And so I mean, not to talk too much about it, but I think for anybody who grew up there, it was is jarring, like just hard to like imagine, I mean, my mom sent me photos from in front of her house and it was 4 feet of water. Fortunately, her house was just enough up.
Yeah.
It didn't hit, but my brother, like they came in the middle of the night and they said, and they came at 2 a.m. The fire department's like, you got to go.
Get out.
You got to get out. It's
Oh, you didn't tell me that too. So now I'm going even more.
Oh, sorry. No, I mean, he's fine and his house turned out to be okay, but it's scary. And I think, again, we talked about,
let's talk about climate change.
Now. But anyway, I want to give people time for questions.
But I will be sending links for donating to Tequeria, donating for the city of Merced, or volunteering. I don't know if they're going to have remote opportunities for that. Also links for volunteering. We're going to be, hopefully, we're planning on it, doing some website redesign projects because we have all these wonderful people who want to help out. We have, boot campers who need some experience, who could really, volunteer. And so we're starting to do more things, that we have more organizers. If you want to help organize, volunteer with the UX Cafecito organizers themselves, going to be putting in links. Anything else? I think that's most of the things. Like we have a resources page of just like people that have, listed resources in our Notion. We have a Notion, if you guys don't know, and we try and get our stuff organized. I need to do better as a library student to help out with that. And I also want to write a history of the UX Cafecito. So I'm going to be like interviewing Brenda and stuff like that. Anyways, lots of things happening. I'm going to go look for some questions. Oh, there's one on my phone. The first one, someone actually reached out to me, crying all the time. Thanks for making that normal, like normalizing that, by the way, because it's hard. It's been harsh out there.
Yeah.
Someone said, let's see, this is from, I want to say it right, Aditya S. Nath. He said, I've observed that even though UX design is an interdisciplinary practice, many companies don't think architects are competent enough to carry out the role. They are especially inclined towards hiring people from an engineering background. This is true for smaller companies. I've seen companies like Google hire people from architecture background. I find UX design to be so closely aligned with what I've learned. And I've also seen engineers struggle with the course at University of Texas. So he'd like your perspective on this. That, it sounds like architecture, I'm not even sure. I'm like, is that an art? I don't know how these things are defined, but we talked about humanities and social sciences. What about art? And I just want to shout out, at UC Merced, I was in the Shaw building, which is social sciences, humanities, and arts, and they just put us all together because it was so small at the time. And then there was science and engineering. That's all we had because it's it started in 2005, so it was very small.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, I think it can be challenging at smaller companies, right? Like so when you're a startup, and it's just 3 or 4 people or 5 people or something like that, which is an experience I've had many times. You don't worry as much about the boundaries between things, right? Like, I remember at my last startup, we had our front end engineer was also a designer. And so, he'd be designing things, but also coding them, right? And blurring the boundaries there. That stuff becomes tougher at a bigger company where functions become more defined. You have these sort of career tracks and functions and things like that. And it becomes harder to accommodate things that blur the boundaries a little bit more. I think that in terms of, the design function, here that we have at Meta, it is intended to encompass, UX and design. And I have a handful of designers on my team who are also coders who get there. And the thing about NPE is it's intended to be a place where people kind of get their hands dirty and work across, are expected to work across disciplines, right? Like we don't have the luxury of sort of saying, not my problem or not my job. And so, you can't sort of, we have our user research. We'll be getting involved in design. We have designers getting involved in research. We have engineers getting involved with design. It's very, things get very messy and mixed up in a good way, right? And I think that we want to empower people to be able to, build the things that they want to build and be able to take control of their of the product that they're working on. Looks like we lost Marisela. But it's I'm not sure if that answers quite the spirit of the intention of the question, but I think it can be like I said, it can be trickier in big companies to accommodate people who are more cross-disciplinary, but I think it's really, really important. I think when it comes to user experience design, you want to be able to empower people to create products and sort of be able to own enough of the experience that it can really feel holistic and that it hangs together. That's something that I try very hard to do at NPE. Any other questions? If you want to drop in the chat, I guess, or.
While Marisela is getting back in here, we do have 3 other questions that did come in through the survey that we put out. So there was one question, these all are anonymous, and it asked, how did the addition of UX designers affect launches from earlier launches when you and your partners did everything yourselves?
Sorry, in the context, I'm not sure I understand in the context of Meta here, or
just in your, it looks like it's just when you've started, when you start a startup and you're the initial founder team, and then you add on a UX designer. So
this is actually a great question. It actually applies not just to UX, right? But it can be an issue anytime a startup starts to scale and has to figure out. Because if you think about it, when you start out as a founder, you're responsible for everything. And when it's just you or just you and another person, everything, whether it's the user experience design. I mean, I had to design products myself because we were so small that it's just me and a co-founder, and somebody had to do some wireframes or something like that. And so I think as a founder, when things are starting to grow and you're adding to the team, what's really, really important is to be very clear about who owns what and who has decision-making authority. And I think one of the worst things that you can do as a founder or as a leader is to hire someone into a key role like UX design, and then undermine them or not give them the ability to own decisions and make important decisions, but also to not give clarity about what they have control over and what they don't have control over. And so, I was working with when I was at BetaWorks, which was my venture fund, I had a portfolio company, and they were starting to scale from being like 6 to 7 people to getting to like the 14 to 15 to 20 people. And the founders are having a really difficult time figuring out, okay, like what do we own and what do our sort of key people underneath us own in terms of design and product and engineering. And I said, you have to actually go and do this work of developing a clear framework around what decisions require the CEO and what decisions can sort of sit with the head of product, the head of design, the head of engineering, et cetera. And so if you want someone to be successful, if you want really great people to come into this role, and work at your company, which you should as a founder, right? You want to be able to give them you want to empower them, give them the ability to make those poor decisions, because if you don't trust them, you shouldn't have hired them in the first place. But they also need to have clarity around, okay, what do I still as a founder need to have a decision over? If it's really just hey, you own the design and I will just give a final sign off, or I'll give some feedback and then you can go back and make changes, that's great. But it's what nobody wants is, and this is what I try very hard not to do with my founders, frankly, is to sit there and play sort of like shadow product manager, where I go in and reverse a bunch of their decisions. I often will say, I would rather, and this is something that actually is very hard for people to hear at a big company, I would rather that I hated your decision and you loved it, then we were both sort of lukewarm on it. And so I have a founder example. He's working on a product. I actually think it's the wrong product personally, but he has extremely high conviction around it, around what he's doing. And I told him, look, as long as you have that conviction, as long as you believe that this is the right thing, I'm willing to be wrong here. I'm willing to see if I'm wrong. And that's okay. And I'd honestly rather have this situation where I don't like it and you love it than, you only sort of like it and I only sort of like it, because that isn't what I want here.
I
So,
want to add my own question in here if you're finished. Have you studied like leadership types? Because that sounds like a servant leader. Do you
I don't know if I've
identify
studied.
as any of these things?
I don't know. I've never studied. Actually, like almost never read business books.
Well, I'd use it for libraries. Like it's,
yeah.
I feel like it's
No, but it's I know what you're sort of
management. I guess
yeah,
it's a manage. It's
stuff.
not business. It's management. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
technically,
I'll say that I'm not a micromanager.
oh God.
And again, I feel really strongly that that if the founders can't do the work, can't if I don't trust them to make great decisions, and we have to, they shouldn't be in the role, right? And I've had to make some of those changes in my time, is to sort of recognize that people were not suited to do this kind of work. And that's okay. I mean, it's not for everybody, right? But that's sort of the deal is, you will have a lot of like autonomy, as I said, and like latitude to define the scope, define the product and the scope and the process for getting it built. But my expectations are that you're going to do a great job, and that you're really going to put everything into that you're going to set a high bar for your own conviction around what you're doing, and that you're going to execute very strongly. And if you don't have those things, then go do something else.
Brenda, I don't have the questions up right now. I'm trying to put all the links in the chat before we end. And if anybody, has any questions, I think you can reach out to me and Brenda. I want to put it out there. Peter, you're open to connecting with everybody that's going to attack you right now. I'll put your information in the chat, and then we're going to put all this stuff in the Slack. We have a UX hashtag UX channel. If you have issues joining that, can't see it, again, message me or Brenda and we'll figure it out. I'm not working right now, so you should probably come at me. Brenda has a job. All right.
So one of the other questions that came in through the survey was for Peter. It's about the different downturns that you've experienced in your career, and they're wondering, is there anything unique about this downturn that you're preparing differently for?
It's always hard. It's always hard to sort of tell when you're in it exactly what, where it's going to go or how it might be different. It's easy to pattern match, right? And sort of, there are ways in which this feels more like 2001 than 2008, for example. And that it doesn't feel like we're sort of on the cusp of a global financial crisis and all that. It does feel like there was kind of a lot of hype around tech in the past few years, and that created a lot of overinflated valuations in the startup world, which are coming down pretty rapidly right now, and a lot of overinvestment, a lot of overhiring. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the bigger, a lot of tech companies, and so I think a correction like this feels a lot like 2001. The difference is in 2001 there were a lot more bankruptcies. And a lot of companies just like completely going out of business entirely, like running out of cash and going out of business entirely. I think we're seeing less of that this time around. So, for me, in terms of how I think about this stuff and how I, I don't know if I'd say prepare is the right word, but the way that I've been thinking about this is that, we're seeing what feels like more of a reversion to mean than anything else. And that, VCs, for example, being a little more disciplined about the checks they write and who they write them to, and the valuations that they will pay for is probably a healthy thing. For no other reason that founders who are trying to focus on building more sustainable businesses were sort of in this weird way, a disadvantage to founders who were really, really great at creating hype around themselves. And so, as someone who, cared a lot more about the substance of the things I was building than, just generating hype around them and raising at the highest valuations possible, I found that refreshing. And frankly, as a VC, one reason why I left venture a couple of years ago was I actually became sort of disillusioned with how hype focused it had. I mean, it always had some hype element to it, but it had become so overwhelming. And I would, spend a lot of time developing like strong relationships with founders. And then when it came time to, for them to do their fundraise, they would, they would take money from it, some investor who was just willing to give them the highest price versus working with the investors who wanted to be really their partners and help them, develop their company and build something real. And that was pretty frustrating for me, and something that felt really different for me from, my beginnings as both a founder and then as an investor, as a VC. So I think, something that is makes sense to do no matter the time, is to, obviously develop relationships with people that you, feel like you can learn from, and that you vibe with, right? I think one of the great things about, the internet right now is that it's a lot easier to find people that you resonate with. I remember starting out, 25, I've been on the internet since before the web, which is kind of scary. Like I got on, I think in 1989, 1990, started doing like the BBS.
Oh yeah, hold on. I want to cut you off. Brenda, are there any more questions?
There is one left that came in through the survey, but no one else has asked any questions in the chat.
Okay,
So,
let's go. We have a few minutes. I think we're going to go over anyways.
So there's a question. Can you please share a memorable experience early in your experience when you had to navigate early markets to figure out the correct go-to-market approach? Yeah, I think I could talk a little bit about, it's funny, like learning from doing Gizmodo and Engadget, and seeing the power of search, frankly, of SEO as a way to get traffic. And again, we all sort of take that for granted now. Like everybody's like SEO in terms of like, making sure you have like the right keywords and all this stuff. But in 2002, Google was kind of, it was still underestimated in terms of how important it was in terms of driving traffic to things. And so what I discovered with doing Gizmodo and then Engadget is that Google loved us. They loved that we were creating a lot of high quality links, and search engines like Google love links. They love high quality links to things. And so, in terms of like their page rank, Engadget, I don't remember what Gizmodo's was, but Engadget's page rank was a 9 out of 10. I think the New York Times was a 10. And that was sort of the authority. They don't make it public anymore, but it was sort of the authority that your page had in the search engine. And so once I realized that we had this sort of power, I took it very seriously and made sure I didn't want to abuse it. So because I didn't want to lose that authority that we had in the search engine, but also meant that the way that we presented our content did change, right? The way that we did headlines, the way that we linked to things, did change. But it also meant a few things. It meant that one, I focused on, creating actually deeper, more richer content alongside the sort of quick update stuff that we did on the blog. Because what would happen is, people would share the bigger, in-depth, the richer stuff that they couldn't get anywhere else. The 5,000 word, 10,000 word interview with Bill Gates. And that would drive inbound links, and people would discover it and people would share it. And so it was this weird, almost like barbell approach where I'd focus on the, on one hand, having really great in-depth, high quality stuff that people couldn't really get anywhere else, right? Like the super long in-depth review, the Apple Event Live blog, which we were the first ones to do that. The extensive interview with, an industry leader that wasn't just, edited down to so short that you couldn't get any value out of it. And then we'd have alongside that, right, this sort of almost like machine gun of like 30 to 50 updates per day. And so what we found is that people love the two combined. And so, I was responding to and looking at my analytics almost every minute. I was looking every hour, looking at what are people connecting with, what are people reading, what are people sharing. And that would inform our content strategy. And that would inform our user acquisition strategy, so to speak, because we would, think about search. We'd think about what links people were sharing. We're thinking about, what kinds of content would bring people in and then retain them as audience. And that sort of being able to take that more data-driven approach really gave us an edge over a lot of our competitors who were, not really looking at their data or not putting in the proper analytics or not really thinking about it in terms of making the site really easy to discover, really easy to share, really easy to consume. And so across the board, we had this, strategy where we're constantly trying to improve all these aspects of it all the time.
Sweet. I'm like, we got all their questions in. Are you okay to go on? Because
you can go a little bit more, yeah.
Okay, I'm like, I'm not working. What's a little bit? Because again, I have hosted it's 30 minutes and I have hosted it to an hour and a half because I was just like, I don't have a job and I want to talk to people that are passionate about things. So I'm motivated to keep applying to jobs that I don't want.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then we can do some final thoughts from Marisela and Peter before we wrap up, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I've saved the chat if anybody wants any of this stuff. I haven't looked at it at all.
I think there's a question from Karina. I can answer
right.
that. Can you talk more about the importance of using storytelling to get stakeholder buy-in, especially when sharing research findings? How can one improve their storytelling skills? So yeah, narrative is something that I think is very, very important. And again, maybe an underappreciated skill, especially for founders in terms of being able to articulate, the story around what it is you're building, where you're going, and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think, I have a user research team of 6 people here, and I have 5 people now. And part of what they have to do, right, is they have to sync up with me on sort of priorities and what we want to understand better and what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. And so it isn't just their storytelling, right? It's also my storytelling that matters for them to get everybody aligned on, what is our mission, right? What are we trying to accomplish? It isn't just make a hit product. It's what is our process now for getting there with, in a smaller organization than it was a year ago? How are we going to be more focused and define the areas that we want to lean into? We talk about generative AI, right? Well, why? And there's a story around that, a story that I tell internally about, well, why are we focusing on generative AI? And that has to do with explaining, some context and background about, well, there's been an inflection point in the technology this past year, right? And you're seeing adoption, but there's also use cases, and there are use cases that are applicable, both internally and externally, and that we should be exploring. And so part of it is about being able to, draw this thread between, the data or the information that is, that you're working with, right? It's not just enough to sort of give people a list of applications or software or something like that has come out. It's not enough just to say, hey, here's a link about, a link to Stable Diffusion or OpenAI, but to say, well, where did these come from? How do these work? Why are these important? How can we work with them? And to be able to, create that context. And so I think, not just for research, I think for anybody to be able to explain and put that in context. And so, when we, are doing our user testing, for example, on a prototype or an alpha or a beta or something like that, part of what we have to do is to sort of, put that information in context. And, we had a product last year, which it didn't work, right? We did a test. I think it was a test of a diary study with 19 users. And I think we ended up having like 1 user retained. And, there's data, but then we have to understand, well, what is our interpretation of this data? What is the story right around this data tell us about why people use it and why people don't use it? And it wasn't, you can't just sort of put metrics and, a couple of, quotes from the diary studies, right? From the user interviews. You have to create that context around it and explain, why this didn't work, why it failed, but also, what can we learn from it? What could we do differently? What does it tell us about what we're trying to do? And so one of the things that I really try to emphasize is that we should try as often as we can to try to focus on learning one thing from each iteration of a product. And that when we build something, it is, what do we want to learn from this? What is the thing what is our objective in this next version of the product we're releasing that we want to learn? The most important thing that we could get a yes or a no or a right or a wrong answer to. And again, that is storytelling in a way, right? You're telling a story around what your hypothesis, what your experiment is and what the hypothesis is and what it means to be right or wrong, so to speak, with this.
All right. So I thought you guys already went through the chat. Brenda, we didn't go through the chat?
No, I mean, there's a
Okay.
lot of questions, but unfortunately, we only have so much time. And
Yeah. Peter,
so,
pick what you want to answer.
Oh,
Um,
I don't know. I have to scroll back. I have know we're a little bit over time, but let's see, Cream's question. Something, a comment about AI, whether something. I think that might be it. I don't know if I have access to the. Is there a separate set of questions from the chat? I think I only have the chat.
I think that was all the questions.
No,
I think
that
it's
was all
mostly
of
just
it.
comments. Yeah.
Yay. All right, guys. It was a lovely time. I'm so glad like I didn't like write down word for word what I was going to do for my presentation, because I was just authentically me. Same with Peter. We just want to just talk whatever we want to talk, whatever comes up in our brains. That's our style. So, well, thanks everybody for our event. Reach out to me and Brenda with any questions, and of course, connect with Peter. Oh my God, like I said, he's very helpful, very knowledgeable, and will hopefully send you some cool resources that whatever pops up into his head. All right. And everybody, thank you for any donations that come in for Thecadia and the city of Merced.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. And I'll go ahead and stop the recording.